Hello and welcome to the Why the Mountains podcast with me, your host, Stephen Farley. Today we are talking with Anselm Murphy, who in 2008 became the youngest Irish citizen at 24 to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Anselm is actually a Londoner, but his father is from Rosslare in County Wexford, and as I told him, my wife is from Wexford, so that heritage carries weight around here. Sit back and enjoy. Anselm Murphy, thanks very much for joining us on the Why the Mountains podcast. So we always start these podcasts with the same question. Anselm, why the mountains?
Thanks for having me, Stephen. And I think I came to the mountains pretty late, and I wasn't the most sporty person when I was younger. So I think the first proper mountain experience I had was when I was 20. And that was me and my twin brother just sort of thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to go to the hills, do a bit of hill walking. So we went to the Highlands, sort of Fort William area. And we did it towards the end of March. So, still snowy on top and everything. And we did it in the most inept way possible with, the worst gear possible. And we went there for a week. And just we'll just bring everything. And we didn't even have a tent, just had inadequate sleeping bags and a basher, just a tarpaulin that you can hammer the, two corners down and tie it to a tree type thing. So yeah, you learn a lot by doing things wrong. And despite doing everything wrong, I just really loved that experience. Especially growing up in the suburbs of London, I just hadn't been in that environment before, but I just sort of thought, oh, it looks kind of interesting. Seen stuff about mountains on TV and thought, I want to try that. So we went there for a week camping, and just hiking up the hills around there, and just had a really good time, despite doing everything wrong and having, boots that give you blisters and taking all the wrong stuff. I just really liked the experience. It's just being in a wild, remote place is a very worthwhile thing. I think everyone should try. And, you may not love it. You might get terrible weather, whatever, but it is a great experience that everyone should try and then, see what they think about it. So once I'd done that, I went to Snowdonia, that kind of thing, other places you can access in the UK, and did things in a slightly less inept manner. And then I had started to get more and more interested in it. I started reading lots of books about it, and I had there's a Reinhold Messner coffee table book called All the 8,000ers, and it's just amazing photos of all of the 8,000ers, as the title suggests. And I just started reading more and more about, the history of different expeditions and stuff. I'd read Into Thin Air, of course, that kind of thing, and just got interested in what that's like. And at the time, it just couldn't seem more inaccessible, because going to Ben Nevis, I'd had some kind of running injury at the time or something, and I was pretty unfit, and I was really struggled. And just thinking, wow, I can barely do anything at sea level, and all of this is on a steep mountain with all of the issues you get with altitude, which is kind of, massive. And it just seemed like a different world. And then I gradually got more and more interested in it, read more about this kind of stuff, and thought, well, why not just try to learn more about it? Because ultimately, other people have done it, why can't I? So when I finished uni then, which was the next year, I used my sort of savings from my summer job to go to the Alps and do a sort of intro to the basics of mountaineering course, and do a easy 4,000 learn the ropes kind of thing. And I really loved that. So then I just thought, oh, kind of keep going then. So since I've been reading so much about Messner's expeditions, that kind of thing, I was, like most people, wondering, how would I do at altitude? Can I cope with altitude? So I used all of my savings that had been, accumulated over like weekend jobs at uni, and then started training to go to Aconcagua. Then I went there, and it was very, very tough, but I managed to make it to the top. And then I started to seriously think, maybe I can try and like focus on trying to climb Everest. And then, yeah, it sort of developed from there. But there's sort of like many different stages there. Like the beginning is just, isn't it cool? Like just a great experience to be in a wild place, away from, normal everyday life. And then you have sort of going to the Alps the first time is like, like the canvas becomes much wider. It's just so different to what you experienced in the UK. Like, big, proper snowy mountains, and most of that course was just like teaching you the basics, like, take you on a glacier, show you the basic skills, walk around in crampons, how to use an axe, that kind of thing. And then you just do I think it was like the last 2 days you go and do Grand Paradis. So, which got lucky with weather and everything, and it's pretty straightforward. So, yeah, really like that. And then, then there's like another type of climbing though, which is being on an expedition. Because it's one thing to be in the Alps and like you're never further away than like, you can come down in a day, as long as you're not doing some crazy multi-pitch thing. Then to be out committed to this mountain for like, 3-4 weeks is a totally different thing. Living in tents the whole time is just a different experience. And I really, really love that. Like, yeah, there are tough parts of it, but I love being sort of immersed in an expedition. You're not like thinking about, oh, I'm got to be back in London in 6 days or whatever for this thing. All of that's gone. And especially at the time that I did it, most people didn't have satellite phones. So that's it. Like for that time, you're just completely cut off from everything. You wake up every day, you look outside your tent, and it's like amazing views that you feel really lucky to be able to witness. And then you just have to, you know, deal with the sometimes miserable effects of altitude, which is quite often.
And did you have trouble with altitude then on Aconcagua? Most people I've talked to do to a greater or lesser degree. How did you go with that?
Yeah, I didn't find it easy at all. That was like my first exposure to serious altitude of, 6,900 and something. And I found Summit Day really tough. I found the whole thing quite tough, actually, to be honest. Like, there was not really, I wouldn't say there were any days that I found particularly easy.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly the last sort of, 200 or 300 meters of Summit Day. I think like several people who were in that group at that time, it was with Jagged Globe, did turn around at that point. And I remember being like quite, it could have gone either way. Like, I don't want to give up, but I am seriously struggling here, but managed to push through and get to the top. I think my training got better and better over time as I was, getting ready for different mountains. But yeah, I'd say I was pretty fit. I also think like definitely a pattern that was on all other mountains. I acclimatize slower than the average person, I think. And I think it was, I can't remember whose interview I was listening to. It might have been the banjo one, where I think he was saying as well on one of his expeditions, he was just like struggling the whole time and, behind everyone else. But ultimately, he did get to the top using very minimal oxygen. So clearly he was capable in the end. And I wonder how many people might write themselves off because they have like, a bad experience, especially at the beginning of an expedition, where if you joined any kind of group, they'll always be on some kind of schedule. And like, okay, the team is moving to this camp today. Someone might just be feeling, oh, I'm feeling terrible now. On a bigger expedition like Everest, you have more time and flexibility to make up for that. But on, shorter ones, you don't. So you could easily think, oh, I'm just not cut out for this. And if you just stuck it out longer, you might be. I've had like several shocking sort of first climbs on big mountains. Like Everest was probably the worst one actually. Base camp to camp one took about 10.5 hours, which is really bad. Really bad.
10.5 hours through the icefall.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a long time to be spent in there.
Yeah. But like the next time took like 4.5 hours. So that's like kind of more of a normal time. And that can be super demoralizing if you don't know to expect, okay, this is it. Because it can be quite hard to be like, suffering through 10 hours, especially in a dangerous area, and just thinking like, who am I kidding? I think I can do this. If you just stick with it longer, that problem does kind of go away. Or at least in my case. And it's been the same on other big mountains where I've had like really bad days early on and then just got stronger as it sort of, as the expedition progresses.
So Aconcagua, so you struggled with it, but made it to the top, which is no small achievement. Like it's almost 7,000 meters. Like a lot of people stop at that. That's as high as they're gonna go, but not you. Was it always the plan to go higher, or was it like that's C, or did you have some sort of vision at the top of Aconcagua you could go further? What was it?
I was always, before I decided to go to Aconcagua, it was sort of in the back of my mind, I would like to work towards trying Everest sometime, but I need to see if I can cope with altitude to see if that's even, remotely realistic. So I think then after that, certainly in my mind, I don't think I'd said to anyone yet, but my plan was I'm going to find a way to try Everest.
After Aconcagua, what year did you go to Aconcagua then?
Was 2006.
2006, so pretty much the next year then, pretty much straight away, you've decided to take the leap to the 8,000 meter level. Why did you choose, pardon me, why did you choose Cho?
I didn't go straight to that. In between, what did I do? Yeah, I went on an expedition to Mira and Island Peak, which I think is like a really good intermediate, because I wouldn't recommend someone goes from like Aconcagua to an 8,000er, because like although Aconcagua is high, it doesn't have, it's not glaciated. You're not really dealing with proper expedition climbing. You don't have to deal with ropes or anything. You don't really need an ice axe. At least when I was there was no terrain that required it. So yeah, Mira and Island Peak are very good intermediate, like Himalayan peaks, or 6,500 meters, but you are on glaciated terrain, using ropes, that kind of thing. So that was a good intermediate step. And I think if people were thinking of working up towards Everest or something, I'd recommend something like that. Don't just go from Aconcagua to a high mountain, because if you're on an 8,000 where everyone's relying on fixed ropes and stuff, and like something happens to them, like they get avalanched away, you don't want to be totally helpless because you don't have the skills to move on snow and ice.
So Mira and Island Peak, I mean, I've been on Island Peak myself. I think it's undersold a bit. I think it's an exaggeration to call it a trekking peak. It's a bit more than that. How did you fare on those two peaks then? No problem?
I wouldn't say no problem, but yeah, like reasonably comfortable. Yeah, certainly not that easy, but they were fine. And I really love that expedition actually, because you fly to Lukla and then you go on a very long sort of circuitous trek towards Mira and over like really interesting varied type terrain. Then you climb Mira, you come down, and then you go over this pass called the Amphu Labster to get into the Khumbu Valley, and then you're sort of approaching Island Peak from the opposite way than if you'd gone directly from Lukla. And that was just a really nice experience, because the whole thing's about a month. So you do really feel like you're just constantly on the move. You're not at a camp and then like, going up and down, up and down. You're on the move the whole time in really stunning scenery that is pretty remote. So then by the time I got to Island Peak was pretty well acclimatized, because already climbed Mira. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was easy. Certainly not. It's got an interesting ridge, like that is a pretty cool summit ridge once you get on it. And just being surrounded by, massive Lhotse wall on one side, and then like behind you is Amadablam, just has some of the best views. Like,
Yeah.
that was a great climb.
Steep from the very start, though, isn't it? Like,
And when you get to the head wall, yeah,
there's no messing with it. Like, there really isn't. Yeah.
yeah. Then Choyu was the following year, so 2007. So about a year between Mirren Island Peak and Choyu. So all the time in between all of these, it was just had some kind of, soul destroying temp job, saving every penny. I was living at home at the time, which is the only way this was possible because wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise. And yeah, all of my free time was just training. So throughout these sort of 3 years or so, that was the pattern. And like each time I'd go away, I'd usually have to come back to being unemployed because no one's going to give you that much time off. So yeah, it's not the most fun outside of the expeditions. If you've got to kind of, your whole life is focused towards doing that thing.
But this is the reality, and this has come through quite a few of the podcasts, the what you need to sacrifice, both in terms of time and family and money, and I mean, it's just immense to get to these heights. What did your training look like once you set your sights on 8,000 meters and show you?
My main sort of bulk of training was running, because living in London, like, there's just no easy access to hills. So a lot of long distance running, like, I don't know, 10 miles or so, sometimes a bit longer. I don't know, runs between sort of 8 to 12 miles or something like that, very frequently, carrying like a big rucksack loaded up with books, long distances at some points, and like basic strength training stuff that, if you read about, what's his name, Steve House's book, training for extreme alpinism or something like that. I wish I'd had that when I was doing this because I didn't. But having read it later, I wish I'd focused most of my training around that, because like years after like Everest and stuff, I was actually planning to try K2 with the guy I climbed Kanchenjunga with. And I did like 7 or 8 months of super intense training based around like what was in this book and what I knew worked from before. And I thought that was super effective. And I'd got in like the best shape ever. And then like the guy I was going to go with couldn't go for some like business reason. And it's like, oh, all of that went to waste. It's like, I want to use this fitness I've built up. But that was like the biggest thing for me. If anyone is like wanting to train for this kind of thing and wants to do it the most efficient ways, especially when I was younger, I used to sort of have a, really push yourself hard type attitude to training. And you need to put in a lot of time into training. So I would be, if I was running, I was always like pushing myself to do it as fast as I could. So if I run 10 miles and I do it like, 2 minutes slower than my PB, I'd be like, oh, you loser, you didn't try hard enough. And that is not at all the efficient way you should train for this kind of thing. What you should be doing is training like just above your lactate threshold. So basically, long, slow distance, conversational pace. And because that's all your body can manage, like a low heart rate at high altitude. So you need to optimize how efficient you are at that heart rate. So for like Choyu, Everest, Kanchenjunga, a lot of it was like long distance running, bit of interval training, quite a lot of weights for, optimized for this kind of thing. And at a pretty good level of fitness, like I could just about do just about under like 3-hour marathon type running fitness level. When I was training years later for this K2 expedition that didn't happen, that was a much more effective way to do it. So from focusing on this, only running at conversational pace for longer durations, I would do like 2 or 3 half marathon or further distance runs a week. And I could do them at conversational pace in like 1:35, which was like miles better than I was before. all of that was built up over like much lower intensity training, but at the right intensity for the right duration. And that time I also, something is actually useful if you're able to do it. If you have access to a skyscraper, do stairs. Because that time I was like obsessed with trying to get like the most effective training. Because like by this time I'm very well aware what it's like to suffer at high altitude. Because like high altitude mountaineering is just suffering, and I want to minimize that and give myself the best chance. So when I was doing all this like you know long and slow type training, I contacted all of the highest skyscrapers in London and said, "Can I use your stairwell for training, please? I want to climb K2." And like, funnily enough, one of them actually got back to me. I went in and like talked to him, and he was like, "Okay, so you're for real? You actually want to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah." So he gave me this like security card that would let me in whenever I wanted to, and I would go there like on a Sunday, go down to the basement, and it's this building that has like 180, it's like 50 plus floors, about 185 meters, something like that. So I would just go up, get in the lift, go down, go up again, and I would do like a whole bunch of laps of that.
Why did you so getting back to Choyu, why did you choose Choyu?
I just wanted to try an 8,000er before Everest and see how I cope at that altitude. I think jumping from like not quite 7,000 to nearly 9,000 is not wise. It's like a very good stepping stone, or like any other of the, easier 8,000ers, because you get to experience like a much longer duration expedition in proper expedition conditions. You're gonna definitely have really bad weather and stuff like that at some point. See how you deal with being on something that high and remote for that long. See how you deal with, expedition living, and expose yourself to higher altitude. And in that case, I used oxygen. So, it's good to have at least use something like that once, so it's not such a, completely new thing when you're using it on Everest, where if something goes wrong with it, it's pretty bad. Whereas on Choyu, you can get away with.
What was Summit Day like on Choyu? What was that first experience going up over 8,000 meters like?
On the cost, actually, funny thing, I hadn't really looked at what current costs are, and I looked at what it was when I went there. Choyu was £7,000 in 2007. Yeah,
£7,000.
Yeah, I know it will have gone up because of inflation, but it's massively more expensive now.
30 something, even for that. There's an excellent book. I don't know if you've read it. It's sitting up there. Who's it by? Will Cockrell, called Everest Inc.
Oh, no, I have heard of it, though. I've heard of it.
Oh, it's brilliant. And it really goes into, the spiraling costs, not just of Everest, but of everything else and all the operators and all. It's an excellent read. I would imagine you'd recognize so much of it in there. But yeah, the cost. Yeah. Me and my friend, we talk about it all the time. We often look at the cost and then we just shake our heads and go, "Oh well, that's never going to happen." It's gone absolutely crazy with the cost and the luxury that some of the operators are offering. These deluxe expeditions costing well over $120,000, $130,000.
It is unbelievable. When I was looking at the new costs, I was also looking at like what you get and stuff, and I could not believe what has seemingly become standard on like higher end operators. Like one of them was like 9 oxygen bottles. What the hell? 9 oxygen bottles is like way off the scale compared to what like anyone that I knew was using. But I guess that's just become normal now.
And you were going with Jagged Globe, like a Western, well-recognized company.
Yeah, and just use, like for Choyu, we just climbed to like Camp 3, which is about 7,500 meters, no oxygen, and then you just use oxygen for the summit day, like less than 2 bottles, which is pretty normal, I think. Yeah, I really did enjoy that expedition. It was another one where when I got to base camp on Choyu is like the highest of the 8,000 base camps. I think it's about 5,700, which is a bit brutal. Like especially the first few days you get there. I remember like seriously struggling just to get to base camp, and like sort of collapsing in my tent when I got there, and like for several hours being super worried, like, have I got severe altitude sickness? Am I going to be able to continue? Like, I felt that dreadful. But then sort of by the evening, I wasn't feeling so bad. And then like, gradually just kind of got used to it. But yeah, it is super, super high base camp. But sort of skipping ahead a bit, summit day on Choa, that was a really awesome experience, like very tough, but it was so genuinely wild and remote. Like I remember, because obviously all of these you start in the dead of night, so you can't really see much. But then I remember just as the sun started to like peek up over the distance, like looking back, like down where we'd come from, you can't even see camp because of like where the route goes. So all you can just see like in every direction is like the most amazing views ever. Very reminiscent of like photos from Reinhold Messner's, All the 8000ers book. And it just felt pretty magical to actually be there when you'd been like, thinking about it so much, reading so much about people's experiences, and very tough in the moment, very difficult, just struggling. Using oxygen obviously helps a lot, but at the same time, the first time you use it, it is a bit worrying. Like, oh, what if this just, there's a malfunction, and like, will I be okay without it? That kind of thing. And I've just got really good memories of that as wow. Like I'm actually nearly at 8,000 meters, like an arbitrary thing, but something that you've read a lot about and like wonder how your body will cope with it and that kind of thing. And it was just, yeah, it felt like the kind of thing I'd been reading about, like that kind of like real, genuine adventure. And yeah, especially when you're like seeing this kind of stuff for the first time, because Tibet is a very different landscape to Nepal. Like, especially on the way there, you just go to the Tibetan plateau and like you get to a point where like you are at about 5,000 meters, but it's completely flat in every direction, except in the distance, you just have like, Everest and Makalu and everything. It just feels like you're in a different world type of place to be. And yeah, I really, really did like that experience of Summit Day. Getting towards the top was the last 200 meters or so definitely started to get pretty tough, and there was some area of like super deep snow. I think I'd gone slightly off the route, and like that slowed me down massively, but eventually got there. And then Choyu, as you probably know, has like a ridiculously long flat summit area where it's hard to tell, am I actually on the summit, or is it like 50 centimeters higher over there? But you get like an amazing view of Everest, Lhotse, and Nuptse from there. So yeah, that's a pretty cool way to know that you're on the top. Yeah, I went the Tibetan side. That's where the normal route is, and I don't think the Nepalese side is commonly climbed. Like it's a much more serious route. Route wise, no, nothing that I would say is like super scary or intimidating. There's like, I guess what I think people refer to it as a head wall at about like 6,600 or 6,700, something like that. But it's not that steep, maybe like 20 meters of steeper ice, but it's all got fixed ropes. So nothing that's that challenging. Just had like fairly, a few days of being at a high camp when there's like really bad weather and super strong wind and that kind of thing, which is enough to sap your enthusiasm. I remember at that time my tent mate, he had like bad diarrhea when we were in Camp 1 in the middle of a storm, and like you're kind of out of options there. I remember him like going out to try and like, do what he needed to do, and he just came back in like a few minutes later with a 1,000-yard stare, and he was just like, didn't say anything, and then he was like, "You've never known true misery until you tried to take a diarrhea dump in the middle of like a snowstorm at 6,500 meters or something."
Oh, sweet Lord.
And that cheered me up because, I like that kind of humor.
Yeah. So you were happy with your performance on Choyu, so what was next after that?
Next was lots more training and then trying to find a way to go to Everest, which ended up being the next year, 2008.
I imagine even then, you said, Joe, you was £7,000. I'd say Everest was a significant amount more.
To go with Jagged Globe at the time, I remember because I wanted to go because some of like the people I'd climbed Choa with were going with Jagged Globe. And at the time, Jagged Globe was, I think, about 35 to 40,000, like
Yeah.
a lot, like completely unrealistic for me. I was already like consistently broke and in a bit of debt the whole time, like to do this, and then I have to like pay off Choyu. But that's where Project Himalaya came into the picture and Jamie McGuinness, because there are cheaper ways to do Everest, at least then. So we were originally going to climb, the plan was to climb from the north side in Tibet. That's cheaper than the south side. And that was going to be 12,500 at the time, which is, a lot of money and put me in debt for a long time. But, it's a completely different picture to what it is nowadays. Like, I think you would probably struggle to get less than, I don't know, 30, 35,000, something like that.
Even then, what are you getting for that,
Yeah.
I think for something you'd trust, you're looking at 50, 60, I would say, at this stage. Project Himalaya, obviously, I know about it, but I know very little about it. Could you explain what Project Himalaya was a little bit?
Project Himalaya is basically Jamie McGuinness's trekking and expedition company. And Jamie McGuinness is a New Zealander who seems to spend, I think, probably around half the year, like on treks and expeditions. And although he has climbed Everest 6 times now or something like that, I think he's definitely has a big focus on trekking as well as climbing, and particularly on like exploratory treks. So he won't just do, Everest Base Camp. He'll do stuff like an exploratory trek for 40 days that like goes to like areas most people don't go to, like different parts of Nepal and India and stuff like that. And he's written like a guidebook on like trekking the Khumbu Valley and that kind of thing. So he's very into that side of stuff as well. But also occasionally would just go to 8,000ers. And I think he would describe it as a professionally led expedition. That's what he called it, because he's not a qualified guide, although he is, experienced. He's spent a lot of time there. And he has like a pretty good, crew of Sherpas who he's worked with a lot and trusts. So it is, yeah, that's the way the expedition was run, really. He's the leader. He sort of kind of suggests what to do, but everyone has more autonomy to, move around with a bit of freedom. So it's not like, right, the whole team is going to Camp 1 tomorrow. It's like whoever feels like it might want to do this. And then other team members might be on a slightly different cadence. Then you try and sync together for the summit, but less dictated than other expeditions from like, the ones that have, I don't know, the big American companies, all that kind of thing. There was 6, including me. We had one English guy. We had a French guy who lived in America, a Costa Rican lady, an Irish guy, an Australian guy, and me.
Obviously, you went from the south side. There's a lot of objective dangers on the south side. So how did you feel, and how did you find the going up through the ice fall to start with then?
Yeah, that all actually happened quite short notice because, like I said, I was planning to do the north side. The only reason I couldn't was because a month before we were due to go, that was the year that China had the Olympics, and the Chinese government shut Tibet to all foreigners because they were worried about people making a scene protesting about Tibet on Everest. So they said, right, no one's allowed in. Very annoyingly, with like a month to go, switched plans to the south, and that ended up costing an extra £3,500, which just equated to like, months of work after the expedition to pay back the loan I had to take in short notice from a very generous family member.
So you had a lot of autonomy then, and Jamie was just giving guidance. So did you react well to that? I mean, maybe a lot of people would rather have, you do this and you do that and you do the other and you do it now and then.
No, I thought it was a really good balance the way he did it. Like, I think he gave people as much guidance as they wanted. And like he was like suggesting this is what we should do and we'll all sync together for the main things. But it wasn't so rigid that everyone has to go today if everyone's not feeling great. So I think it was a very good balance. And like I thought the way he ran everything was great. Like really wouldn't fault it. I think
So
he did a
did you
great
do it in
job.
the traditional way? You know, up through the icefall, camp 1 back down, camp 2, maybe camp 3 down, then
Yeah.
back up for your summit push,
Yeah.
and all went smoothly.
Well, I wouldn't say it was all completely smooth. I think, like I mentioned earlier, the first trip through the icefall was horrendous. Not because anything terrible happened. I was just like not properly acclimatized, and I really struggled. So yeah, it took like 10.5 hours to do what is about 700 meters of vertical gain, which is pathetic if you compare that to like anything at sea level or even at that height. Yeah, I just really, really struggled. Like, it's the kind of like exhaustion you only get at high altitude that's not comparable to anything else. Because, like, if suppose a lot of people will run for fitness, for training. Imagine the most exhausted you've ever been running. At a minimum, you could just stop and walk. Imagine stopping and walking is beyond your top speed, and it's like that for hours. That's a bit what it was like. And then because that like took so long, then the sun comes out, and depending on if there's cloud and stuff, you just get cooked. Like people do often talk about, the cold on big mountains, but I don't think they mention the heat often enough, particularly in the Western Coombe on a cloudless day. It's so debilitating, like how hot it is. So yeah, I really struggled that first time.
Was the icefall in a bit of a state that year? How was it? You know, sometimes it can be really bad, lots of ladders, other times not so bad.
I guess I can only compare it to like the time I was there, but there was enough ladders. I think the record was like three strung together at one point, or something like that. But like, I don't know. There must have been at least 20, 25, something like that. And that's something it just takes a bit of getting used to. The first time you do it, it is just a weird, unnatural thing to do, to walk over like a crevasse that's all you see is blackness down there. And then you just get used to it and it kind of becomes routine because you've got to do it so much.
So, Anselm, describe for us then Summit Day on Everest, because obviously this has been the dream since the age of whatever it was, 20 when you're in university. What age were you then when you were on Everest ready to go for the summit?
24.
So a 4-year period. So you got there pretty quickly. How did it
Yeah.
feel and how did it go? Just describe Summit Day for us.
I only got there quickly because I had no life for those years outside of it. But yeah, it was actually like, for the most part, I would say we were pretty lucky with how everything went. Like, it was not super cold. It wasn't super windy. So, like, super lucky to get conditions like that. Getting to, like, the South Pole the evening before, it was definitely a bit of a struggle. Like, doing it on, like, lower flow oxygen as well. I'd started using oxygen that day and, like, 1 liter a minute. Definitely don't feel like super rested or anything, but just sit around waiting for time to go. And then we left at 10, so in the darkness, start climbing up. Could already see there's a bunch of like head torches like showing you the routes in the like ahead of you. And for the first several hundred meters, like really not that bad, because now this is the first time on that expedition I'm using oxygen at like a reasonable flow rate of like 2 liters a minute. So like 4 liters is the max. 2 is like your oxygen bottle will probably last about 8 hours on that. So yeah, that feels good as well because like, you, especially if you've got a full bottle, you're actually getting a little bit more than the regulator tells you. I can go into all the technicalities of oxygen later because Ted Atkins, who made the top out mask, like I knew him and he gave me all this detail that I didn't know at the time, but it made sense. So yeah, feels quite good moving on oxygen for the first few hundred meters. But then as I got to the balcony, then that's the point where, it's starting to get a bit tough now. I think that's about 8,400 meters. And then when you're on the balcony, then you start like going up the ridge, like towards the south summit. And like around that time is when it starts to get a little bit light. And I remember seeing like, the massive like triangular shadow of Everest cast, which is a pretty cool thing to see. And then working my way up that ridge towards the south summit, there's a bit like 100 meters below it that is quite rocky. It was, definitely slowed me down a bit, the combination of that plus altitude. I remember thinking at the time, like, there's bits of this that I haven't really seen before, because back then in 2008, everything had more of an air of mystery, is a good way of explaining it. Because, like, I would read, like, Everest books, and each book would have, like, a handful of pictures in it of, like, certain landmarks on the route. But there's massive, like, stretches between this landmark and that landmark. I have no idea what it looks like. And now with the internet and everyone, is just sort of posting everything all the time on satellite phones, that mystery is gone. But at the time, there was loads of it where it's like, oh, I really wonder what this section is like, and really cool to like experience, that. And then finally got up towards the south summit, and I remember at that point, I'm definitely struggling. This is not easy. It's just the grind of pushing yourself forward at that kind of altitude is something you need to experience to understand. And you've got all the other stuff of like, at this point, I had not really slept for a very long time. Like most people probably haven't there. You haven't been able to eat properly. Had like a really sore throat. And like, so every time I remember like swallowing water would just like feel like I was swallowing a razor blade because my throat was so uncomfortable. But it's like all the kind of things you just have to be like, just deal with it, like there's no option but to deal with it. And I remember getting up to like approaching the south summit, because then when you get there, you'll be able to see the summit ridge towards the Hillary Step. And like in my mind, almost sort of convincing myself, oh, maybe this is actually the summit. It looks like it could be the summit. It's like, I know it's not. I know it's not. I know it's like further. But finally get up there, and then the view is pretty amazing, because like everyone will have seen that view of the, fairly sharp summit ridge goes towards the Hillary Step, and then you've got the like final slope to the summit. From there, it's still like a good 2 hours to the top though. So quite a long way, and you're super high altitude, and you're, you over that distance, then you're only gaining another 100 meters, but it's quite a long horizontal way to go. So getting across the ridge was not as bad as I thought it would be. There's a couple of bits where you go over like a sort of super smooth rock in your crampons, and it's like, oh, I'm really glad there was a rope there for that bit. Then the Hillary Step wasn't actually anything to worry about. Like, it has been made up to be maybe more of an obstacle than it was. Obviously, it had a fixed rope, and that made it quite easy. But I think enough people had been there that there are like, good footholds being kicked into it and everything.
Yeah. Okay.
And then once you get to the top of that, you sort of have this feeling of like, all right, I'll get to the summit now. But it is actually further than you think. I remember, like, that's all you read about in accounts of people getting to the top of Everest, is like the Hillary Step, and then like you're at the summit. No, you're not. It's quite a long way along that ridge at like 8,800 meters. And it's, I don't know, it must have taken like 30 to 40 minutes to like get from there to the top. And that was a very nice moment to get, say, within, like you can see it. It's there. It's like 5 minutes away, and you're going to make it. And you work towards it for a very long time. Yeah, that is a pretty magical moment. And then you finally get to sit down for a second, just what you've been wanting to do like this whole time, because it's just exhausting. You get to just appreciate the view for a bit, which is something that you're not really doing most of the time, because so much of it is like you're kind of hunched over, taking a few steps and, just focusing on what's in front of you. You don't stop that often to like look behind you at, the view. And then Jamie was not far away, so he got to the summit like basically the same time. so did Andy, and who was the English guy, and so did David, who was the Australian guy. And yeah, we were there for a while. And of course I should mention, and the Sherpas who were helping us, without whom none of us would have got remotely close to it. Definitely an important point to mention. I guess it kind of goes without being said that 99% of people would not be able to get, anywhere close to the summit without Sherpa's support, carrying tents and putting in camps and all that kind of stuff that you need. Certainly not me.
What an amazing man, and what an achievement. I love the detail that Anselm brings to his description of Summit Day, but also the training, the hardship, and the sacrifice that goes into even getting to the bottom of Everest to overland summit. Anselm's story doesn't end there. His experience on Kanchenjunga is also a story worth telling. That episode will be out